The morning in Crestwood was already warm, a kind of southern warmth that clung to your skin before the sun fully settled in. Outside the county courthouse, the white columns glowed soft against the haze, but inside Courtroom 4 felt colder than it should have. Judge Naomi Pierce stepped through the side door precisely at 8:45 a.m. Her robe moved silently as she walked. Her posture was upright, her hands calm. She had presided over hundreds of hearings before, but something in the air, this morning, something just beneath the quiet, felt heavier. Across the room sat Officer Travis Kincaid. He didn't fidget. He didn't look away. He leaned back. One leg crossed over the other, a polished silver pen twirling between two fingers. Not out of need, but out of habit. Or maybe intention. He wasn't dressed like someone under pressure. No jacket, crisp white shirt, top button undone. It was subtle, but it said enough. I'm comfortable here. He gave a small nod to someone in the back, an officer maybe, then let his eyes drift lazily around the courtroom until they met Naomi's. She didn't look away. Kincaid had been involved in multiple use-of-force complaints, at least two with racial overtones, one involving a teenager and a cracked jaw. None of the cases had made it far. Video footage disappeared, testimonies blurred. Supervisors used phrases like lack of context. But this time the video had gone public before anyone could stop it. A grainy clip from a gas station camera. A teenager, unarmed, stepping back, then a flash of movement, then blood. This wasn't a criminal trial. There would be no jail time, just a civil suit brought by a mother who refused to stay silent. The court couldn't take Kincaid's badge, but it could take something else, the illusion that nothing had happened. Naomi opened the file, scanned the summary, then looked up again. Kincaid was still watching her. His smile wasn't wide, but it lingered just long enough to make the air feel thinner. The press sat 2 rows back. A few activists took seats near the aisle. Court clerks whispered quietly. Even the bailiff seemed to stand a little stiffer than usual. Naomi's fingers rested on the edge of the bench. She remembered once as a child, watching her father step out of a police car, bruised and silent. He hadn't said a word, just sat at the kitchen table and stared at the wall for 2 hours. She never asked him what happened. He never offered. That silence had stayed with her. Now, years later, she was sitting higher up, but the silence hadn't gone away. It just changed shape. She leaned slightly forward. Court is now in session, she said. Her voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. The plaintiff's attorney stood. Papers rustled. The room shifted. Somewhere near the window, a breeze moved the edge of a curtain, just barely. Kincaid just smiled again, the kind of smile that made you feel like you were playing a part in a script he'd already read. And in his version, the ending never changed. Naomi didn't respond. She had learned long ago that the power of a courtroom didn't come from who shouted the loudest. It came from who stayed standing when the room turned quiet. She looked back at the file. This trial wouldn't break the system, she thought. But maybe it would show the cracks. The morning moved forward in careful steps. Testimonies were read, objections raised, then overruled. The plaintiff's attorney guided the room through a series of images, frames frozen from the surveillance video. In one, the boy's hands were raised. In another, he was on the ground. The room stayed quiet. Naomi listened without shifting. Her hands stayed folded. Her pen never moved, but her eyes caught everything. Across the room, Kincaid had grown restless. He shifted in his chair. He whispered something to his attorney, then leaned back again. His foot tapped the floor once. Then again. He wasn't smiling anymore. The plaintiff's attorney paused mid-sentence, asking to play the video aloud. The room adjusted. The lights dimmed slightly. A screen flickered on behind the bench. Naomi nodded. A moment later, the room filled with static, and the grainy clip began to play. There was the boy, barely older than 17, standing near a gas station display, looking over his shoulder. Then, without warning, a blur of motion, a fist, a fall. The sound of impact, even muffled, echoed with something that wasn't just violence. It was routine. Familiar. Naomi looked ahead, not at the screen but past it. She didn't see the punch this time. She remembered a different one, decades ago. Landed on someone who hadn't even raised his voice. Then it happened. Without warning, a chair scraped sharply, papers fell, and suddenly Officer Kincaid had crossed the space between them. He didn't shout a warning. He didn't hesitate. His fist landed just beneath her eye, hard, fast, unfiltered. Gasps erupted. The courtroom stood still for a breath too long. The sound of flesh meeting bone echoed louder than the video ever could. Her chair tilted slightly. Her glasses hit the floor. But Naomi didn't fall. She gripped the edge of the bench with one hand, steadying herself. Her head turned back toward him slowly, blood running in a thin, bright line along her cheek. The room hadn't caught up yet. Two bailiffs rushed forward, their radios crackling, hands grabbing at Kincaid's arms. He resisted for a second, violently, but was quickly pinned down, his knees buckling under pressure. His voice rang out raw and cracked. "She ain't no judge. She ain't no one to me." The courtroom was chaos. A woman screamed in the back row. One of the court officers swore as he tried to restrain Kincaid. A camera near the ceiling rotated slightly, still rolling. Naomi stood straight again. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't wipe the blood. Her eyes remained fixed on Kincaid as if he were still in front of her. Not the version now on the floor, shouting and struggling, but the man he had been a minute earlier, convinced of his untouchability. She looked to the bailiff and spoke, each word shaped carefully. "Hold him." Then her voice dropped softer, steadier. "Don't turn off the camera." The bailiff nodded, his face pale. Naomi placed her hands flat on the bench. Blood from her cheek touched the polished wood. It left a mark, thin, curved red against dark, grain. Nobody moved to clean it. The courtroom had seen raised voices before. It had heard lies, truths, oaths, taken with trembling hands. But this, the act, the blood, the refusal to fall, felt different. The press captured it all. Flashing light from a camera clicked near the floor. Somewhere a journalist whispered into a recorder. Another scribbled notes without looking up. Kincaid kept shouting. His voice broke between words. "She's not law. She don't get to sit above me." Naomi didn't answer. She looked at the table where her glasses had fallen. Bent, one lens cracked. She didn't reach for them. Instead, she took a breath and slowly, quietly sat back down. The courtroom didn't speak. It watched. Watched the blood dry into a line that curved across the bench. Watched the woman in black robes hold the space without rage, without collapse. Justice wasn't clean anymore, but it was still standing. By mid-afternoon, the clip had already gone viral. It started as a shaky 30-second phone video posted by someone in the back row. Then came the courtroom footage. Clean, fixed angle, high quality. Two different views of the same punch. One chaos, one silence. The hashtags appeared too fast. Naomi did not fall. Courageous justice charm still standing, on she held the line. Some called her brave, some called her reckless. Most couldn't look away. On one network, a commentator raised his brow and asked how a judge could maintain credibility after allowing herself to be struck on the bench. On another, a panel of activists replayed the clip 3 times in a row, calling Naomi the spine of the modern justice movement. Even late-night shows picked it up, one host dubbing the moment, "the slap the system didn't see coming." The noise swelled beyond the courthouse. By morning, the governor's office had received over 12,000 calls. Civil rights groups issued statements. A local pastor compared her to Rosa Parks. And deep in the state capitol, someone started to worry. At 9:02 a.m., a memo arrived in Naomi's inbox. It was brief. No seal, no direct order, just a confidential suggestion from a state senator's office, worded with care for her safety, for the court's integrity, for the greater good. They asked her to take a temporary leave. She read it once, then closed the email. She returned to her chambers without a word. Later that morning, when Courtroom 4 opened its doors, Naomi was already seated. No makeup, no fanfare, Just the same. Quiet strength. The same black robe. The bruise under her eye was visible but not hidden. The courtroom filled quickly. Cameras pointed but didn't flash. Reporters whispered but didn't shout. She looked across the room, not for the first time, and saw people waiting not for her verdict but for her presence. The next case was unrelated, a zoning dispute between two local businesses. But it didn't matter. Her return was the message. The bailiff called the room to order. Judge Naomi Pierce presiding. She nodded once, almost imperceptibly, and the room exhaled. But even as she spoke, her voice calm, clipped, deliberate, another voice rose inside her. A voice that belonged to a man who had once stood just like she did, but on the other side of justice. Her father, Isaiah Pierce, had been arrested in the summer of 1996. It was a hot night. He had been walking home from work, still in his security guard uniform, when a patrol car pulled up. They asked him where he was going. He answered. They asked again. Then they told him to lie on the ground. He didn't fight, but he didn't move, fast enough. The arrest report later mentioned non-compliance. The hospital form listed a fractured wrist and a bruised spine. Naomi was 13. She remembered sitting in the hallway outside the ER, watching nurses pass with clipboards. She remembered her mother pacing. She remembered her father's eyes when he finally emerged, tired, dimmed, and more silent than she had ever seen them. That silence had shaped something inside her. Not rage, not even fear, just a quiet promise. You don't change a system by shouting at it. You change it by making it look at you and not look away. And now, all these years later, she was still making them look. Even through a bruise, even through blood, even through the polite threats tucked into state memos. Naomi reached for her gavel. She tapped it once. Next case, she said. The sound echoed across the wood. It wasn't loud, but it landed where it needed to. The office of District Attorney Eric Langston hadn't changed much over the years. Same worn leather chairs, same framed law degree slightly tilted on the wall, same faint smell of brewed coffee and old books. But something in the air had shifted, something Naomi could feel before the door even closed behind her. Eric stood as she entered. Naomi, he said, his voice neutral. Thanks for coming. She nodded once, taking the seat across from his desk. There was a time she would have joked about the creaky chair. Today she said nothing. He didn't either. Not at first. He shuffled some papers, adjusted his pen, looked past her out the window, then back at his hands. I watched the footage, he said finally. All of it. Naomi didn't reply. He continued cautiously. You handled it with restraint. More than most would have. She waited. He wasn't done. But the situation's tense. A lot of moving parts. Politically, it's, well, you know how things get. Naomi tilted her head slightly. I know exactly how they get. He looked down, smiled, but not with warmth. There are calls for review. Internal affairs is involved now. The city council's asking questions. The governor's office, too. It's not just about Concencade anymore, it's about the department, the optics, the precedent. He didn't say it's about you, but she heard it anyway. She folded her hands. So you're saying they're circling? He looked at her, then looked away. I'm saying this might be a good time to let things settle. The pause was long but not heavy, just tired. They had worked cases together once. Protest shootings, wrongful stops, juvenile justice reforms. They'd shared takeout on courthouse steps, shared grief when verdicts fell the wrong way. But now, his tone was lined with diplomacy, his words carefully padded with conditional phrases. She stood. Thanks for the coffee, Eric. He rose too. Naomi. She didn't stop walking. Out in the hallway, the walls felt tighter than before. The marble didn't echo as much as it used to. Or maybe she was just walking softer. Eric closed the door behind her slowly. Inside, he sat down again, rubbed his forehead, reached for his phone. A message blinked at the top of the screen. No name, no number, just 5 words. If she pushes, release 2019. He stared at it for a long moment, then locked the screen and slid the phone face down on the desk. The silence in the room didn't comfort him. Naomi drove home without music. She didn't cry. She didn't curse. She just listened to the hum of the tires and the clicking of the turn signals. The city passed by her window in steady frames. Graffiti, traffic lights, a bus full of middle schoolers. She'd known Eric too long to be surprised. But disappointment wasn't always about surprise. Sometimes it was just about the weight of seeing. A familiar face retreat when the fire got too close. When she pulled into her driveway, the sun was low, the sky dimming into the kind of orange that reminded her of Sunday evenings as a girl, when her father would sit on the porch and say nothing, for hours. Inside, she dropped her bag by the door and sat at the kitchen table. No news, no messages, just her. She stared at the blank wall across from her. She'd walked alone before. She would do it again, but this time felt colder. Not because of the blow, not because of the cameras, but because somewhere, someone had decided to weaponize a year, 2019. She didn't know what the message to Eric meant. Not exactly, but she could guess. She had made hard choices that year. Choices she did not regret, but that others might twist, that they would twist. Still, she hadn't come this far to step backward. Now she stood again, poured herself a glass of water, and let the silence settle around her, not as surrender but as preparation. 2 days after the incident, Naomi made a simple request. She filled out the formal form, signed her name, and handed it to the tech office clerk without comment. Request for full security footage, Courtroom 4, March 8th, 0830. She'd done it dozens of times before. Nobody flinched. But 3 hours later, the response came back short and sanitized. Due to a technical failure, the primary courtroom feed was interrupted from 0846 to 8:52 a.m. Secondary backup failed to initiate. The room had more than one camera, more than one feed, more than one failsafe, and yet all of them failed for exactly 6 minutes. The 6 minutes that mattered most. Naomi read the email twice. She didn't frown, didn't sigh. She just closed the tab. That afternoon, Lena Cho knocked gently on her door. She was the youngest clerk on the team. Mid-20s, sharp-eyed, soft voice, grew up in Oakland, studied at Howard, interned at the ACLU. The kind of quiet fire that didn't draw attention but never went out. Naomi looked up. "Yes, Lena?" Lena stepped inside and closed the door behind her. Her hands were clasped tightly. "I was reviewing the metadata log," she said. "Just routine, but—" She hesitated. Naomi waited. "The cameras didn't fail," Lena said. "At least not on their own. Someone executed a remote command override at 0845, exactly when the incident started." Naomi's eyes didn't widen. She simply nodded once, as if confirming a suspicion she had already lived with for years. Lena glanced toward the hallway, then back. "I didn't copy anything yet," she said. "But if I did, if I were to extract the raw system mirror onto a personal drive, hypothetically, it would be from Terminal 2. The internal failsafe logs still exist for 48 hours. Naomi looked at her for a long moment, then quietly. "If you were to keep that copy safe, I would advise you to label it as birthday photos." Lena blinked, then gave the faintest smile. "I'll name the folder Auntie's 70th. Naomi let her hand, pressed on the table. "Lena, I'm not asking you to break protocol. I know. I'm not asking you to choose sides. I already did." There was a pause. Then Lena lowered her voice further. "If we have the original file, what happens next?" Naomi didn't answer immediately. She glanced toward the window, sunlight pulling at the edge of the curtains. Then she said slowly, "When the law loses its light, we don't stop looking for justice. But we carry a smaller flame of our own. Quiet, careful, but alive." Lena stood straighter. There was no victory in her expression, only resolve. She turned, to go, then paused at the door. "Judge Pierce," she said. "They're watching everything now." Naomi nodded. So are we. After Lena left, Naomi leaned back in her chair. She closed her eyes. She had known the moment the punch landed. The moment she stood up and said, "Keep the camera on." She had known someone would try to erase that moment, not because of the violence. Systems had covered worse, but because she hadn't fallen. That was the part they couldn't let survive. She opened a drawer and pulled out a folder, worn edges, a red tab labeled IS-96. Inside, photos, reports, a decades-old arrest form with her father's name typed in faded ink. They had buried that file once too, but this time someone had already made a copy, and someone else had learned how to carry a fire. It was just after 10 p.m. when Lena sent the message. Subject line: Found something. Attachment: one zipped folder, password protected, titled Records Recovered 14A. Naomi read it in her kitchen, barefoot, glass of water sweating quietly in her hand. Inside the file were internal emails, dozens, all bearing government domains time-stamped within the past 72 hours. Each one a thread in a web that was no longer hidden, just quietly organized. The first chain was between D.A. Langston and the E. Police Chief's office. The tone was polished, professional, but buried between scheduling and procedural updates was a single undeniable sentence. If she pushes, we can't just sit back. Drop Pierce 2019, it's public record. Let the press interpret. Yet another thread revealed a forwarded memo from a political strategist. Attached were media narrative options, polling reactions, and one chilling suggestion: leverage existing incidents to erode her public credibility without directly engaging the footage. The last email Lena had highlighted came from a private account, but the footer still bore the name: Raymond Chalmers Foundation for Civic Order, donor to State Judicial Reform Peace. Short and precise, the message read, "I've spoken with the governor's team. If this judge becomes a symbol, we all lose control of the story. Time to act." Naomi closed the folder. Her reflection stared back at her from the dark glass of the kitchen window, still unreadable. She had known this wasn't just about a punch, but now she had names, structure, strategy. The machine wasn't improvising, it was following protocol. And someone like Raymond Chalmers didn't send emails unless he was already 5 moves ahead. He wasn't a household name. He didn't need to be. His face rarely showed up in campaign photos, but his checks did. He was known to fund law and order candidates, appear at unity galas, and host private dinners in homes so large their zip codes had gates. Kincaid had attended one such dinner, so had Langston. So had half the judges in the state's southern circuit. Naomi hadn't. She remembered the invitation. Glossy cardstock, serif font, RSVP by courier. She'd never replied. Now she knew that silence had been noted. She sat down slowly at the table. The file labeled Pierce 2019 was already open in her mind. She didn't need to read it again to recall what it said. 3 years ago, a sentencing decision she made in a probation violation case had drawn quiet backlash. The defendant was a white woman from a politically connected family. Naomi had chosen jail time after 3 failed rehabilitative programs. The outcry wasn't public, but emails were exchanged, meetings held. At the time, she'd called it justice. Now it was ammunition. She looked up as Lena entered, quiet, hesitant. "I didn't mean to dig that deep," Lena said. "I was just trying to cross-check metadata," and the names started repeating. Naomi didn't speak right away. She watched Lena's face, the nervous energy behind her words, the subtle weight of realizing something bigger than either of them had just been touched. "You were smart to stop there," Naomi said. "I didn't copy anything else," Lena added quickly. Naomi nodded. "Good. That's not your burden to carry." Lena hesitated. "But it's yours?" Naomi met her eyes. "Yes," she said. "It's mine." Silence settled like dusk between them. Then Naomi added softly, "Chalmers is scared. Not of what I'll say, but of what people will believe if I'm not silenced first." Lena clenched her jaw. "What are you going to do?" Naomi didn't answer right away. Instead, she turned to the side wall of her kitchen, where a single framed photo hung. Her father Isaiah at the 1997 hearing where all charges against him were dropped, his hand resting on her shoulder. Her 13-year-old self looking up at him not with pride but with permission to speak, to stand, to continue. Naomi drew in a breath. "Tomorrow," she said. "I don't speak in court. I speak outside of it." Lena looked confused. "A press conference?" "No," Naomi said. "Something smaller, something harder to spin." She stood. "We're going to let them know the story is already being written and not by them." The envelope was unmarked. No return address, no stamp, just her name, Naomi, scrolled in uneven handwriting. It was waiting in her mailbox when she got home, nestled between junk flyers and a utility bill. She opened it standing by the front door, keys still in hand. Inside, a single photograph. Her daughter Eliza standing at the gate of her elementary school, ponytail swaying, backpack sliding off, one shoulder smiling at something off camera. Below the image, in red ink, beautiful, just like her mother. Naomi didn't scream. She didn't throw the photo or call the police. She simply walked to the kitchen, placed the envelope on the table, and sat down. The glass of water from earlier was still half full. She stared at it, then stared through it, and somewhere between the kitchen clock's tick and the settling silence, she broke. The tears came quietly at first, slow, steady. Then all at once her hand pressed to her mouth, her shoulders hunched forward. For the first time in this entire story, the woman who hadn't flinched from fists or headlines or political betrayal finally let go. No one was there to see it. No audience, no camera, just the echo of fear that no courtroom could silence. Her phone buzzed minutes later. A message from her sister. "We picked up Eliza from school. She's safe. She's playing with the twins." Naomi replied with a single heart emoji, but her hand trembled long after she hit send. That night, Eliza sat across from her at the dinner table, a half-eaten grilled cheese sandwich between them. The girl picked at the crust. Then, without looking up, she asked, "If I see something wrong but no one else says anything, should I stay quiet?" Naomi blinked. Her throat tightened. There were 100 possible answers. A lesson, a metaphor, a quote from some civil rights hero, but none of them came. Instead, she stood, walked around the table, and wrapped her arms around her daughter. Held her like she had the night Eliza was born, small and warm and impossibly still. "I don't know," she whispered into the girl's hair, "but I hope you'll be braver than I am." Eliza leaned into her without a word. That night, after the dishes were done and Eliza had fallen asleep with her stuffed elephant curled against her chest, Naomi returned to her study. She didn't turn on the light. The moonlight was enough. She stood in front of the wall behind her desk, bare, beige, quietly waiting. And then slowly, deliberately, she picked up a piece of chalk from the drawer. She wrote in big, uneven strokes across the center, "I will not step back." She stared at it for a long time, then wrote one more word underneath. Mother. No signature, no flourish, just the truth hung on a wall like a flag. Not for others to see for herself. A reminder. A vow. And somewhere beyond that silent room, in the gears of a city pretending not to watch, a system flinched, just a little. Because they hadn't broken her. Not yet. The archives room in Fulton County Courthouse wasn't built for comfort. The lights buzzed overhead. The shelves smelled faintly of dust and paper, and silence, thick as cotton, settled over everything like regret. Naomi had been here before, but not like this. She moved through the shelves slowly, her fingertips grazing years of redacted sorrow and forgotten names. She wasn't looking for Consincade, not directly. She was looking for 2002, the year her father, Isaiah Pierce, stopped walking straight. She remembered the change. He hadn't talked about it, not really. Just said he had slipped near the sidewalk outside the store, that his knees were bad, that it was nothing. But he had flinched when sirens passed. And once, when Eliza was 3, she asked him why he never wore shorts like other grandpas. He had just smiled and changed the subject. Now, 20 years later, Naomi found it. Case ID 021647OPD, filed March 19, 2002. Complainant, Isaiah Pierce. Status, dismissed. Reason, lack of corroborating evidence. Accused officer, in training. Travis Consincade. The words blurred for a second, then settled. The report was brief, clinical. A traffic stop, alleged aggressive takedown. No body cam, policy hadn't required it yet. No witnesses, no disciplinary follow-up. But Naomi read between the lines. Her father had been forced to kneel on the side of a patrol car. The scar behind his left knee, he always said it was from construction work. It hadn't been. And now, 2 decades later, the man who had pushed her father down in silence had punched her in public. Same fist, same intent. Naomi stood in the quiet for a long time, then carefully took a photocopy of the file and slipped it into her case folder. That evening, the house was silent. Eliza had gone to her cousin's for a sleepover. Lena was working, remotely on metadata restoration, and Naomi was alone in her study, the way she had always done her deepest thinking. On the shelf above her desk sat a framed photo of her father. He was younger in it, barely 40, mustache thick, eyes proud. It had been taken the day she graduated from law school. He hadn't said much that day, just gripped her shoulder and nodded like he'd known she would do this all along. Naomi picked up the photo and brought it to her desk. She cleared everything off. Then, from the top drawer, she retrieved a small velvet box. Inside, her oath badge. It was polished metal, worn slightly at the edges. On the back, she had engraved it herself the night she received it. For him. For us, for what comes next. She placed the badge at the center of the desk, then placed her father's photo beside it. And then she whispered, not with rage, not with sorrow, but with something deeper, something earned. You didn't get to see it last time, but I swear, Dad, this time you'll witness justice with your own eyes. Her fingers curled slightly over the badge. It wasn't just symbolic anymore. It was a promise. Later that night, Naomi opened her laptop. She uploaded the 2002 file, paired it with the footage Lena had recovered, and saved it to 3 encrypted folders. She titled them, Truth for Eliza, Isaiah Watches. No press yet, no statement, no reveal. But the story had started bleeding, and this time it would not clot quietly. The courtroom wasn't full. It was overflowing, every seat taken, reporters wedged, shoulder to shoulder in the press box. 3 cameras perched on tripods in the back row, their little red lights blinking like heartbeats. One belonged to a national broadcast. The other streamed live to tens of thousands across the state. Judge Naomi Pierce sat in her robe, hands folded. Her voice, when she spoke, was calm, unhurried, surgical. This is a public evidentiary hearing convened under Section 1214 of the Judicial Oversight Statute. All witnesses are under oath. Proceedings are being recorded and streamed for public transparency. She didn't look at the cameras. She looked straight at Eric Langston. The district attorney had aged a decade in the past week. His once trimmed tie was slightly askew. The circles under his eyes weren't concealed by powder, but he sat upright at the witness table. He still thought he could spin this, until Naomi opened the folder and read the first subject line aloud. March 3rd, 2021. Consincade assault footage suppression. The room shifted. Eric's throat moved, but no sound came. Naomi didn't blink. Would you like to explain this email? Eric hesitated. His eyes darted toward the back, toward the gallery. No one moved. Then he leaned forward and the spin began. While, Your Honor, internal investigations often involve discretion, especially when certain footage lacks full context. Naomi cut him off. Footage showing a civilian struck with a baton while kneeling? She clicked a button. The screen behind her flickered. It played. No music, no narration, just raw silence broken by the thwack of violence. A collective gasp rippled through the courtroom. Naomi turned back to Eric. Would you like to revise your answer? His hands twitched, and then the dam cracked. Yes. Fine. There were multiple instances, at least 6 internal reviews. We kept them quiet. I was told to keep them quiet. Naomi's voice didn't rise. She simply asked, "By whom?" Eric hesitated. Then finally, "The Office of State Judicial Strategy and Private Advisors." Outside the courthouse, the live stream viewership jumped by 20,000. Inside, Lena Cho was sitting, quietly in the second row. She tapped a button on her tablet. At that exact moment, 3 of the largest news networks in the country received an encrypted drop, complete with metadata logs, subject lines, footage, financial ties, and one name, consistently appearing Raymond Chalmers. Inside the courtroom, Naomi turned the page. "Mr. Langston, do you recognize this document?" Eric stared. It was a signed authorization, his signature, dated a full week before Naomi had been attacked. A green light for procedural immunity for Travis Consincade. His voice cracked. "I didn't think it would come to this." Naomi looked at him for a long time, then spoke not as a judge but as something colder, steadier. "It always comes to this, Mr. Langston, when silence becomes policy." She turned toward the court clerk. "Madam Clerk, please read into the record the subpoenas issued under seal on April 2nd. The clerk stood, her voice clear, strong. 3 subpoenas, 1 to the State Oversight Office, 1 to the Chief of Police, 1 to the Chalmers Foundation. Dated, stamped, prepared weeks ago. Naomi had planned this. Not after the punch, not in anger, but in foresight. She hadn't reacted. She'd anticipated. A blade disguised as bait. Every word of Eric's testimony was now under oath. Every file released. Now matched the subpoenas in place. Every denial, every delay, every closed-door decision now admissible in